Hello, everyone. My name is Mason Funk, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Outwords Archive, also known as Outwords. And we are genuinely thrilled to have you all here with us today as I turn on my Do Not Disturb. This is a first for us. We've never really done a gathering online around love and sexuality. And so it's a great opportunity. We saw Valentines Day coming up with all of its complicated charms. And we said, this is a really wonderful opportunity for us to bring together some really amazing people to talk on this rich topic. Before I get started, I would like to, first of all, do a very important land acknowledgement. Outwords stands in solidarity with all Indigenous people. We acknowledge that our headquarters in Los Angeles are located on the stolen lands of the Tongva people, who are the past, present, and rightful future stewards of this place. I make this acknowledgement as part of an ongoing commitment on the part of this organization to develop relationships and practices that support Native sovereignty. Just want to say a couple of words about Outwords. We are an archive of interviews with LGBTQIA2S plus elders across the United States. We started about 5 years ago. We to date have recorded about more than 200, I think about 210 interviews in 34 states. We are constantly looking to reach into as many different parts of our community as possible to create a fully rich, fully diversified composite portrait of this community that we all call home, the queer community. And as I mentioned, the theme for tonight, we've called this event Valiant Valentines, a conversation on sex and love with LGBTQIA2S plus elders. Basically, for those of us who have lived all of our lives outside cultural identities of culture, of gender and desire, what do sexuality, romance, and partnership look like across our lifespan? And that word partnership, even that has to come up for debate and further analysis and discussion. How do we continue to disrupt, negotiate, and even every once in a while embrace societal norms as we get older? One final quick note before I hand it off to our moderator. This is a conversation about love, sex, and gender expression, where they all meet in the middle. And so we welcome you here. We are a sex-positive organization. Our community would not exist without the full expression of sexuality, gender expression, and everything else that makes us who we are. So therefore, you may hear some frank talk in the course of this event. We apologize in advance if you're offended, but we hope you'll stay with us and for a really beautiful, rich conversation with lots of earthy sub themes, and we hope you'll be fully entertained as well as enlightened. With that said, and without further ado, I would like to welcome Aida Manduley, who is our amazing moderator for this evening. And Aida, take it away.
Thank you, Mason. I'm coming in broadcasting live from Boston, Massachusetts, which is traditionally Wampanoag, Massachusetts, and Nipmuc land, as well as a territory of amazing Black liberators. So that feels important to say in conjunction with your own land acknowledgement for Outwords. Who am I? Why am I here? I'm your humble moderator. I'm a therapist. I'm an activist. I'm a sexuality educator, and generally a rabble rouser. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you and moderate this panel. I'm not going to be aggressively moderating, but I'm here to introduce folks, pitch questions, and keep the conversation flowing. If you want to contact any of us, Jack and other folks from Outwords are going to be putting our contact info and other ways of reaching us in the chat. So if you need to leave early or anything like that, never fear. We exist outside of this panel, and this panel is also being recorded. So you can read more about me on the internet. I'm not going to take up time from the panel to give you more info, but just know that I like to have my finger in a lot of different pots, and that's my main jam. So let's get started with the panelists. Let me start off by introducing Doc, and I'll give you a little bio, and then we're going to go into a video, and we'll do that for each panelist. So Doc lives in Palm Springs, California with his husband, James. He's worked as a leading energy efficiency expert for PG&E and served as the first chair of the California Commission Collaborative, a group dedicated to ensuring that high efficiency buildings live up to their potential. Doc is deeply involved in the leather and polyamory communities as well, and he is a longtime AIDS activist and HIV survivor. So, Jack, take it away with the video.
My doctor told me in May of 2001 that he recommended that I leave work because the way my body was reacting to the virus, and even with the meds, the chronic fatigue that I was having and the other issues I was having physically, that I was under way too much stress for me to stay healthy on the long term. And I ignored him. I had never felt more validated in my career in my life. I was doing things that I felt were really important. And I loved what I did. I loved it. Building energy efficient schools and establishing criterion for California's energy policy and so many other good things we were doing, and it was really wonderful work. So I ended up in a situation where I worked myself into the ground again. Towards the end there, I can remember sitting at my desk and literally being in tears because I could no longer keep up with the demand, and I didn't know what to do. And I called my sponsor, and I still have a sponsor in program. She's been my sponsor for 20-some years. And I started whining to her about my life was my job, and I made a difference in the world. And she said, honey, I have something to tell you. She's not going to be easy to hear. I said, you used to be important, and now you're not. Get over it. I went out and got the tattoos on my hands that day. I'd always been tattooed. I've been heavily tattooed since I was a young man, all over my body. But I didn't have any tattoos that showed when I worked in the corporate world. And that day I went out and got the tattoos on my hands. And I haven't looked back.
Excellent. All right. Moving on to our next panelist. So you get a taste of everyone who's coming on board. Next up, Jewelle Gomez. Jewelle is best known for her novel, The Gilda Stories, published in 1991, a Lambda Literary Award winner for fiction and science fiction. And I got to add to this, I remember reading that stuff in college. So I was very excited to know that she was going to be on the panel. Jewelle also worked on the first weekly Black television show in the United States called Say, I don't know if we fixed it. It was either Say Black or Say Brother. I think it's Say Brother. Was a founding member of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, known as GLAAD, and she served as the president of the San Francisco Library Commission. She was also on the board for the Estrella Foundation and was part of the 2004 lawsuit to make gay marriage legal in California. So, Jack, take it away with Jewelle's video.
Marriage was always suspect. I mean, it had begun as an institution to oppress women and make them property, and it had evolved very slowly, but not enough to me to justify it as an institution. Diane and I, we had a discussion about what marriage meant, and when people went to City Hall to get married, we talked about it and decided, maybe not. So when the NCLR and ACLU decided to do this case against the state of California, they called us and said, would you be litigants? We spent, 30 seconds and said, of course. Because putting aside what we felt about the institution, if people wanted to take part in that, if people wanted that right, why should they be blocked? So we agreed and spent 4 years on the, campaign trail, doing all the interviews and things like that. And of course, everyone always asks, and when are you going to get married? So we decided to do it. And then at the ceremony, which we had at the public library, what I saw in that moment was, this is a way you build community. Because I could look around see members of my family, Diane's family, close friends, and library staff. I also performed a ceremony in a Mexican restaurant for two friends of mine. And at one point when we did the ceremony, the guys who were the busboys, they stopped, they put their hands behind their backs in a kind of formal stance. I don't know how well they understood English, but they knew what was happening, they could see what was happening, and they respected it. That's how you build community.
All right. Last but certainly not least, I want to introduce Gigi Raven Wilbur. Gigi is a certified sexologist and sex coach through Sex Coach University with a bachelor's degree in philosophy and a master's degree in social work. Shout out to other social workers. Gigi was the co-host of After Hours, Queer Radio with Attitude in Houston, Texas, and is now the producer of Adult Bedtime Stories, a podcast that provides sex ed that you did not get in school, but should have. Gigi is also the author of The Dominance Handbook, an intimate guide to BDSM, a co-founder of Celebrate Bisexuality Day, and a Sacred Harlot and Priestess in Aphrodite's Temple. So take it away, Jack, with the final video.
I didn't learn about being intersex until much later in life, till I was 23. I remember growing up and they, everyone from my father on down to school officials kept trying to make me be more masculine. It was kind of rough growing up because I had very few friends. Almost nobody wanted anything to do with me. I was kind of the weird kid. So I think I was kind of scapegoated and looked at as the black sheep from early on. Basically, I'm partly male, partly female, and the doctors did surgeries to make me look more male, and they put me on hormones to make me more masculine. Basically, I have a penis and testicles, but I also have scarring where they set up what was my pussy. You have to be a male or a female. We live in a binary sex world. There's nothing in between. I don't even know if my parents knew. They never talked about it, but my father was a minister, and both my parents were very Christian, and they didn't talk about those kind of things. Back in the 50s, when I was born, often they just took the baby to another room, did surgeries, and then brought it back and said, "Oh, you're the proud parents of a whopping boy." Think about all these old men playing around with my genitals and playing God with them. Just felt icky and weird and felt a violation. And I think that's why I still have anger with the medical community. Everything felt hopeless. I finally got a job working on ranches, and I did that for a couple of years. And then I had this other ranch hand that said, "Hey, I want to go to college. I want you to go with me." And I finally said, "Okay, I'll show you how bad an idea this is." And we went to college. And then I finally graduated and then got a master's degree. It was through this time period that I took a sex ed class, and I discovered that I was hermaphrodite. They call it intersex, but I like the term hermaphrodite. We have a heritage from ancient civilizations where the hermaphrodites were the shamans and the spiritual leaders. They had a function in place. It was one of my first boyfriends that got me into BDSM, and especially the healing and spiritual side. Basically, it's all about power exchange. It's one person giving up power to another and letting them take total control of the scene. For the first time in my life, I had safe words, and things would stop. And I think that alone was so empowering to that inner scared child inside. Just the feeling. that things were going to get better, and that at some point my true colors were going to shine brightly in the world. Yeah, I'm weird, I'm different, and I'm proud of it, baby. I like who and what I am. And I didn't always feel that way. It was a process. But I came to love being who and what I am.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for all those videos. So now I'm going to ask the panelists to turn their videos on so we can see your lovely faces. We will have a Q&A portion from the crowd, but I'm going to say if you want to put your questions in the chat before that officially begins, please do. I'm happy to integrate the questions with my own. We don't have to wait until the arbitrary Q&A time because time is fake. So to start us off, I will ask questions generally to the panel. I'll have the panelists answer as they wish rather than directing any question because I want y'all to do whatever feels good to you. And we will just organically move through the questions. So let's get started. While we were prepping, one of the things that came up in our conversation was that in a lot of Valentine's Day discussions or even some of the promo for this event, there's a real big focus on the dyad, the unit of two, and that's not something that makes sense for everyone and certainly not for every panelist or person in this chat right now. So I wanted to ask y'all, how do you define your community and how has that changed across time? And again, community defined however you want. That's why I asked the question vaguely. What does that mean for you and your relationships? And any of you can start. We talked about doing the hand raising so that people don't talk over each other. So I see Doc with a hand already up there. If you want to kick us off, let's go.
Thank you very much, Aida. I think that the definition of community is different for me than the definition of family. And yet my family extends into the community and the community reaches back into my family. The introduction talks about the fact that I live with my husband, and I do live with my husband. I also live with my paramour. My husband and I have been together 30 years. My paramour and I have been together 9. I wear a collar, a power that is based in power exchange from a man I've known for 25 years. I have a series of lovers, some in power dynamic relationships, male, female, transgender, and non-binary. And those are my family. They're also my community. And one of the things that you just mentioned, the idea about the dyad. There's a philosophy among many people that I know. Success about the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom talks about it often. And that philosophy is called relationship anarchy. And relationship anarchy speaks to allowing each relationship to find its own level. Allowing each relationship to find its place in your life. And not expecting one human being to fulfill all your needs. I have no prejudices against folks who choose to live in that particular circumstance, and if they're happy and it serves them, that's wonderful. But there is an entire realm of people out here in the world, my community, my extended community, straight and gay, straight and in our extended LGBTQ, etc. community. There are a lot of straight people I know. One mom, 2 dads, 4 kids, living in extended community and open relationship. And I think we limit ourselves terribly when we start looking at the world as dyads.
Thank you so much, Doc. Who would like to go next, Gigi or Jewelle? I see Gigi with the hand raising. All right, go.
I think for me, growing up, I was intersex and kind of outcast. So I really didn't get a sense of community early on. I was isolated. I used to walk in the woods a lot by myself. And back then, my community was wild animals, actually. I'd have coons walk up to me, and I always had an affinity for creatures. And it wasn't until I went to my first bisexual conference and I felt like, oh, I'm home. This is part of where I fit into all this, because I didn't fit anywhere in mainstream society. And I think for me, and I remember at the end of the conference, they played We Are Family, and we were dancing and getting wild and crazy, and whole big, huge room full of bisexuals. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I'm a part of something bigger than me. And I think that's a good description of what community is. I'm a part of something bigger than me. And that just felt so, my heart just felt so warm and good inside, because for the first time in my life, I belong somewhere. And I think that's another part of community. It's where we belong.
Thank you, Gigi. Also, you're highlighting sort of the way that some of these things change over time, right? And the idea that we have to limit our idea of community to just humans, colonial at best. And I could say a lot more, but I won't. Jewelle, I would love to hear from you on this question.
There I am. Okay, thank you. And hi to Doc and Gigi. I'm so happy to be here with you all. When I was growing up with my great-grandmother, and I was very close to my grandmother, her daughter, I also had two stepmothers, a favorite and a non-favorite, and my dad. And my mother was on the next ring circle out, and her husband. And I really thought of these people as my family. And the biggest drag was I had to buy so many Mother's Day cards every year. But by and large, I felt so loved as a kid that I felt I got armor for whatever was going to happen to me out in the world, in this really fortunate way that you don't often think of women of color growing up in poverty. I felt I was really fortunate. So moving out into the larger world, I think I had a much more specific way I felt I was looking for community. And it was going to help me feel like that other family had helped me feel. And so I had great heartbreak when it didn't work out with people who were supposed to be friends. But one of the great things that I have found about being a lesbian is, I don't know if this is congenital, but lesbians don't like to lose our ex-lovers. It's like, get away. But they'll never go away. And so I end up, and this is somehow in what Doc was saying, with this circle of people who I may not have sex with now, but they know me sexually in certain kinds of ways that can't be replicated just by your, pals. So I feel really like that is a community, and it is also family. And I feel really fortunate to have it, because I think we're all looking for that place where we are accepted for who we are. It doesn't matter if I don't call you for 5 weeks, you don't get up all in my face and saying, what's happening? Who are you calling now? What's going on? You're just like, hey, and I feel like that's what family is for each other. And that's really what family and community is for me.
Thank you, Jewelle. One of the pieces that I'm also hearing is a lot of alignment with all of us, and knowing that, if we had other panelists, maybe there would be disagreements. There may be disagreements later in the panel, but I love that we're really talking as broadly and expansively as possible about these ideas of what family can mean, what community can mean. And so one of the things that I'm curious about is, especially with Outwords, right? There's this idea of we need these archival materials and we need to honor and celebrate our elders. I am not yet an elder, though I hope to be one in the future. And so I was wondering, how do intergenerational relationships of any stripe, again, relationships, take that as you will, how do those figure into your life? Is that something that you have, feels important? Tell me a little bit more about that intergenerational juiciness, if there's any to share. And any of you can start. I'm happy to. Oh, Gigi got the hand raised first. Go.
Growing up as ADHD and with dyslexia and some pretty severe learning disabilities, my typical, which is typical for a lot of us that are kind of neurologically divergent, was to have peers and friends that were either much older or much younger than ourselves, because we didn't fit in. We stood out too much for our own age group. Older people would think, oh, he's just young. Or younger people would say, oh, he's so smart. But with my peers, I was looked at as being too spaced out and weird. And so I started even dating people on a wide range. I remember in my early 20s, I dated a man that was in his 50s and a woman that was actually in her mid 60s, as well as people much younger than me, but I had to stay within the legal codes, so I didn't date anybody that was under 18. But I did, as I grew older, I continued that kind of trend of having partners that were either older than me or younger than me, but never quite fit in with my own age group until much later in life. And by then it was okay, but for a long time I just had that kind of trend to really reach out to people that were much older or younger, just because of my being such a space cadet in a way.
Thank you, Gigi. I made the not joke of time being fake, but the idea of queer time or queer temporality, to get a little bit philosophical here, that's one thing that comes up a lot, where ideas of what a developmental milestone is, or when you're supposed to do things, or in what order, for a lot of queer people, for a lot of trans people, it's just not the same as for folks who aren't that. And so I think you're also speaking to that a little bit. So I'm curious, Doc, Jewelle, which of you wants to go next with this question?
I can. Having grown up with a great grandmother and a grandmother, I was always in an older environment. And I think that really affected my behavior, affected my sense of patience, moving slowly. And that has been really helpful, but it also served to, I think, put distance between me and my own age group. I had several friends who I was close with all through high school. But I think as I turned into my 20s and 30s, I was less comfortable with my own age group. The first man I dated was 30 years older than me, and when I was in my 20s. And I kept looking for a woman who would be that much older than me to date, but it didn't happen. But I feel like I don't now have as many relationships with younger people as I might. In part, that's because of the pandemic. So you don't go anywhere to really meet people. But a couple of committees that I'm on, like at the public library, there are younger people on the committees. So that has been wonderful because I get to meet and work with And I think working with people is one of the best ways to get to know them. Doing a project or something like that is a great way to get to know other people. And I feel very gratified that things are opening up a little bit, because I do feel like it's not like I want to be preaching to people all the time saying, I'm really old and I'm really wise. Let me tell you how to do this. I just want to have a conversation, and so that we get to learn from each other. And that's been really hard to do during the pandemic. And I really miss that kind of exchange.
Thank you, Jewelle. There's also this concept of, I think a lot of us may talk about, mentors and the older person being the mentor.
Right.
Mentorship in reverse also is really valuable. Having the folks that are younger that can teach us, I'm a millennial, but I love my Gen Z folks that teach me things about their generation and what they're experiencing. So I'm excited to, again, think of all the ways that we think things have to go a certain way, and here just say, actually, no, there's other ways of being, there's other ways of existing. And someone in the chat is kind of, I think, mentioning that too, this idea of understanding the value to, as a mentor, perhaps to younger people as an out loud older queer person. So maybe we can include that in a little bit. Doc, I'd love to hear from you before we move on to the next question.
Okay, well, I was overjoyed to hear about Jewelle's upbringing. I grew up in the opposite household. At 10, I was taking care of younger siblings and a parent who was using substances and needed caring for, and dealing with an absentee parent. And so I've never learned how to child. And so from 10, 11, 12, 15, 19, I come at the world as dad. And it's both a blessing and a curse. I have in the course of my relationships, especially within the power exchange or power dynamic communities, I've had people who were in submission to me, wore my collar, who were 20 years older than me. My boy who wears my collar, who lives with me, and we've been in a relationship now for 9 years. He is 32 years younger than me. And I think that in terms of how the age difference can work, it's how can we mentor each other? Because none of these relationships, none of the relationships is unidirectional. How do we mentor each other? My boy is a genius. He's absolutely brilliant, and he is engaged, and he's a wonder. And I learn from him every day. I've worn this collar for 10 years now, and of a man I've known for 25 years. And that is the one place in my life where I can go and not be in charge. I get to have a place where he is the one man, he's the man with a plan, and I do what he says. And that is a freedom like I haven't known even in my childhood. Brings tears to my eyes. So I think Ida, you were talking about the fact that we can give to each other. I'm glad when my 60-year-old capabilities and learnings benefit another. I mentor a lot of people in the world. I actually work with in a volunteer basis with recovering drug addicts and alcoholics, and I am mentoring at any given point as many as 13 or 14 people. in that regard. And that's demanding, but I freely share what I have to give them. But the amazing thing is what I've learned in those processes. What they give back, and so none of this is unidirectional. It's a combined. We give and take from each other, and in that instance, there are times when it is my responsibility because I have more, my responsibility because I know more, my responsibility because I can give more to do that. And there are other times when it's my responsibility to sit back and listen. So, thanks.
Thank you. Jewelle, did you want to say something?
I did, because, and Marcus, who's on our stream there, asked this question about recognizing the value of younger people as an older queer person. And I think it has been really interesting for me in a growing experience to read and understand how younger people present themselves, understand themselves as genderqueer, which is an expansion of what we as lesbian feminists were trying to get to in breaking down gender barriers so that women did not feel as oppressed. And I think it has been really amazing to look at trans people and genderqueer people who continue to push that boundary out further and further, and an understanding of how radical that is in our movement, but in the larger world, because it really freaks people out. And that's a good thing,
Thank you. Well, and that I think connects to something that's an undercurrent in what we've been talking about, which is this idea that, sometimes we're forced to assimilate or we're urged to assimilate, and that's not the only option we have. And it's sometimes not actually the best or most whole option for us. And so, to get into maybe some of the spicier questions, because that's what I'm here for. A couple of you have mentioned sexuality or lovers and flirting and all that good stuff. And one person in the Q&A was asking about the spiritual and healing aspects of BDSM and fetish. And so I actually wanted to expand that a little bit. So I would love to hear from you about any kind of healing experiences or even spiritual experiences that connect to your sexuality or embodiment, right? So it doesn't have to be just about sex. It can be about kink, which intersex, but is not the same. But this idea of healing and connecting to something maybe greater than ourselves, I'd love to hear from any and all of you up for answering that question. And I know that Doc is down to answer first, so I'll let you go. And I know, Gigi, you were excited to talk about this, so maybe you can go after that.
Thank you, Aida. My spiritual practice is not only connected to my BDSM, it's connected to larger involvements I have in the world that involve body challenge among BDSM people. So there are times when the act of a BDSM scene can be so cathartic that they can heal lifelong trauma. I've seen it happen, and it has for me as well. I'm also a member of a group called Ritual Steel, which includes people of all genders, people of all orientations, and our goal is, in a safe, sane environment, to be able to expand our spiritual awareness and expand our spiritual practice through extreme body challenge, including suspensions, firewalks, and glass walks, and other versions of historic practice that are intended to expand consciousness. And I have, you know, I have a couple of people in my life who will come to me and say, you know, this is rather graphic, but they'll come to me and they'll say, I need you to flog me until I bleed tonight. I need that release. And for them, it's a spiritual event. And if I'm taking it as my sacred duty, for me, it's a spiritual event as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're also speaking to the ideas of ordeal, right? And that ordeal, there's so many ways we can walk those paths. And Gigi, you also went to get a master's in social work, right? But as clinicians, there's stuff that we do with trauma and ordeal. And it's so important to be able to see, hey, therapy's not the only way that we know or can or should be doing this. So I'd love to hear, Gigi, from you about your experiences with this question as well, and then maybe head over to Jewelle.
Yeah, I came from a father that was very disciplinarian. He was a minister and he beat me. And at times he stuffed a lot of his work. He had to appear as this pious man, never get angry. So he had to stuff all that anger down. Well, he'd come home to this hyperactive kid that was all over the place, and guess who got the brunt of it? And I was traumatized from, I mean, he one time beat me till I was comatose for a few days. I don't know how long. They just put me in bed and left me in my bed. They didn't even take me for medical treatment. And I just laid there kind of zoned out. And I remember just seeing this line and standing there in my mind. I said, if I cross this, I'm not going back. And it took me a long time to be able to go back. And it was through BDSM that, because I came out of high school, just no self-esteem. I thought I was this piece of shit and I couldn't do anything right. And everybody told me, don't even think about going to college. All my messaging from childhood was so negative, except for my grandmother's. And it was through my first lover. He said, we need to work on this. Let's do some role play. And I'm going to role play your father, but you have safe words. And he beat the hell out of me. And it started gradually. I'd say my safe words and we'd stop the scene. And then I finally got to the point I said, okay, I'm going to bite this bullet. I'm going to really step down on it. And so I let him go as far as he wanted to take me. And by the end of the scene, I just felt this wash of emotion, and it was this cathartic experience. And I do believe firmly our bodies remember things that our mind doesn't. And all these emotions and all this body retention just released after this scene. And I was this giant puddle of just, oh. And he held me and he rocked me in his arms. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of a bigger man. Because my father was 6 foot and broad-shouldered. Here I am, petite. And at the time, I didn't even weigh 85 pounds, you know, and he was a huge man. So huge men used to scare me, but it was from that one scene where I faced my fears and I had my safe words, and I knew that the person doming me really loved me at a deep level. And it was such a healing experience just to release all that stuff I had stored in my body for so long. And I reached this state of catharsis. It was just, and it was kind of spiritual too. It just felt this love and connection that to my dom that I'd never felt for anybody before. Just this, thank you for taking me through this. I needed this so bad.
Thank you, Gigi. That also, I think, speaks to this idea. Again, the body remembers. And there's only so much we can do with talking, right? And I say this as a person who also does talk therapy. There's only so much we can do if we're not getting the body involved. So Jewelle, I know that you're someone who does a lot with words, but also I'm sure you have some spicy stories around spirituality and healing. So I'd love to hear from you before we go on.
Well, let me just start by saying I'm probably, and this is going to be really shocking to people who think they know me, I'm the least spiritual person you ever want to meet. Let me just say that. However, I think, and I've been thinking about this as you all have been talking. At this point, I have, I think, 7 tattoos. And I think for each one, I went to get the tattoo at a point in my life, and what the tattoo meant had deep significance for me. And I, before I got my first one, it was, gosh, maybe 75. And actually, I was living in New York, and tattooing was illegal still in New York City. So I had to go up to Westchester. And I thought a lot about what it meant. And it was a tattoo of my lips. And I, blotted my lips, and I wanted a tattoo of my lips. And this is how long ago it was. The tattoo artist, I wanted it on the front of my shoulder, and he wouldn't put it on the front because he said, sometimes people regret it, and then you're stuck there with that tattoo. And, and I'm like, man, I came all the way up here. I got on a damn train to get the tattoo, and you're not going to put it where I want it. But so he put it on the back. It was really, that shows you how time has changed. But the tattoo was meant to be about self-love. That's why I wanted not just lips, but my own lips. And so I think about each time I've gotten one of these 7 tattoos, it has been about moving myself to a different place. And there is, of course, we're talking about the physical challenge. The physical challenge of being tattooed is pretty striking. And I would have more, except I think my partner, it really upsets her a little bit. She watched me get one tattoo, and there was a tattoo for her. And she was like, totally like, thank you, no, thank you. So I do think of that as being, deeply spiritual for me, and moving, because it was a place where I had to look on what I wanted on my body, because each tattoo goes into your body. And so much for me of any kind of spiritual questing or soothing has to do with ancestors. You're in Wampanoag territory, which is my territory. That questing from my ancestors for peace, for guidance, for power. It really, if I think about myself with any spirituality, it goes toward that, really. Those 2 ways.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up the ancestry piece, I think, really explicitly. One of my friends and colleagues, Bianca Laureano, I remember her at one point talking about how, there's a lot of talk of not enough, but talk of intergenerational trauma, but that we don't talk as much about intergenerational pleasure if we're thinking about ancestry, and sort of what would it look like if, instead of just or only imagining our, people in our lineage as having suffered, what were their orgasms like? What was pleasure like for them? What did they do to self-soothe and feel good in their bodies? Because even amidst a lot of pain, as I'm sure a lot of us know, there can be pleasure, there can be joy, there can be exciting moments. And so that idea of, okay, we can pull knowledge about trauma, but can we pull knowledge about pleasure and think of that backwards as well as toward our descendants and the people that are hopefully coming after us in whatever way. And so, thinking of this across the lifespan, expansive perspective, and knowing that We have about 15 more minutes. I want to encourage folks in the chat, if there's any questions you want to ask, please pop them in there. I would love to know how, for you, your sexual expression or even things like flirting have changed over time, especially because for a lot of folks in my generation, there's the, I don't know if they're flirting. How do you flirt? No, 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 no. But that's also very gendered. And so there's folks where there's a lot of fear about flirting or fear about it showing sexual interest. And there's folks, again, sometimes along gendered lines that are like, you will know and you will not be in doubt. So I'm curious for you how that has changed over your lifetime. And I'm curious which of you would like to kick that off. Gigi is raising the hand, so let's kick it off with you first.
As being so neurologically divergent, flirting used to go way over my head. I did not understand it growing up. But there's another side to flirting. And part of that side was when I was younger, I had all this negative messaging. And I thought, who would want to even touch me, much less sleep with me? And I think I had to go through a process before I could learn to flirt. And I had a very good friend say, you know, your mind talk is very negative. You really tear yourself up. And in a way, I was my own worst enemy. The things I told myself, you'll never succeed. You're just a bumbling idiot. And I had to turn that around. So that was my first step, was turning that mind talk around. And I discovered that when we get into a highly erotic states, when we get sexually charged, we receive much deeper. And so I started doing what I call my sexual erotic morning affirmations, and I've been doing these for years. I took all the bad negative statements and I said, is this true and where is it coming from? And once I realized, oh, this isn't true, this is coming from my childhood, I started turning that around and I said, well, I can succeed in learning in college. I may have to do it differently. I may take longer, but I can do this. So I'd get in bed naked and I'd masturbate till I was just almost there. And then I'd hit the play button and play all these positive affirmations and just slowly stroke myself and let the message come in deeply. After 60 days, people noticed a change. I was smiling, I was confident, I was on top of the world. I even took myself on a date with myself and I did everything I would have done for a partner for me. And I even came home and had great sex afterwards, just solo sex. And I realized during this process that when we get deeply into really the ecstasy of sex, all of a sudden we shift our mindset. We become focused in the moment. We are fully present with ourselves and another partner maybe. And I realized, oh, Tibetan monks spend years in meditation trying to get to this space. And I got to it in a week. It's amazing. And so I've been practicing my erotic morning affirmations ever since. And it's like, what happens is when we get erotically charged, we're releasing dopamine, serotonins, all these good chemicals for the brain into our body. And we feel more connected to life and everything. And so once I started doing that, and I know I'm getting the long way around flirting, but once I was able to get that, I realized, oh, we're from Carl Sagan, we are stardust. And the term radiate, all of a sudden I felt radiant in my being because I'd raised all this good erotic energy inside of me. And I think today sex is energy. And I shine out in the world. And to me, that's the highest form of flirting. It's like when I can smile at someone and kind of think back to that morning affirmation and raise that energy just a little bit and say, ooh, I kind of like you. You're so beautiful. And it just shines out of me. So that's my definition of flirting today.
Thank you. And I think you did so much so succinctly. You're talking about behavior modification, trauma reintegration, challenging negative self-talk, all the things in just this one package, right? So thank you for sharing that. And especially I think, for folks who are intersex, gender variant, or deviant, or however we would call it in the moment, that is so revolutionary, because so many times now, not necessarily historically, but now we're told that we're deficient, that we're wrong, that we need medical correction, that we are not allowed to be in our bodies, and that they shouldn't have pleasure. So to be able to reclaim that or fight it is really powerful.
I would like to add one thing on the reclaiming. On top of the surgeries they did to make me look more like a boy, they also circumcised me. And one of the things that bothered me for years was that they had circumcised me. And then I found a way to restore the foreskin through slowly stretching it over time. It took me 1.5 years, but now I have my foreskin back. And talk about empowering. It's like I got back something they tried to take away.
Thank you, Gigi. Again, sort of the body mod undercurrent in this panel is giving me so much joy. Doc, Jewelle, which one of you wants to go next for talking about this idea of flirting or sexual expression changing over time?
Jewelle, you want to go? I can.
Why don't you go?
Okay. Flirting and sexual expression over time. When I was 15 years old, there was a gay man who was killed outside of a bar west of the town I lived in. He was beaten to death. And the sheriff chose not to investigate because this was in the newspaper. He probably deserved it. When I was young, flirting was not something we could do. And we had within the gay world, we had our own secret codes. We had our own ways of working. We're talking the 60s and the 70s here. And as an aside, before I get into this more, when I see young people of every possible gender expression and they are touching in public and happy and flirting openly, it does my heart joy. You can't even know how happy it makes me. Some of the folks in the audience may not know, but there's this thing called the 3-second look. The 3-second look. You're walking down the street, you see an incredibly attractive man. You catch his eye. If he diverts his eyes, you divert yours immediately. But if he doesn't, you give him a 3-second look and you keep walking. And when you have passed him and he has passed you, you quietly and slowly turn around and catch each other. That constituted flirting. That's how we identified each other. And, and I lived through that era as a teenager and in my early 20s. And at a certain point, I moved from a more rural environment to a city environment. And although that sort of thing still went on, it was now possible for me to, walk into a gay bar and see a man and, do traditional flirting like people always do. And there was an era when that flirting basically was pretty much a connotation that sex was going to come later, especially in the gay male community. You know, if you were out there doing that and you weren't willing to put out, you know, people would think something was wrong with you. And luckily that matured. You know, I know young men who flirt as a matter of course. And to them, it's just being nice to people. And it makes me happy. It makes me happy. I'm glad that has changed. I'm glad our world has evolved in that way. I'm sorry that as my PDA is a public service to my queer elders that came up in the chat. I love that. And it is. It really is. I'm going to have a hard time expressing this next thought without sounding like I'm expecting something back. But we put up with people in my age category and older put up with a lot of bullshit from the straight world and a lot of danger. And we did it anyway. You know, I think about the guys who started the Staters Motorcycle Club and Avatar and those things in the 1950s. And when it was not only, you could be fired from your job, you could lose your house, you could be jailed simply for being gay. And here were men riding motorcycles, wearing leather, and not only gay but kinky. I think of Phyllis and some of the other older people I've known who pushed the world forward in accepting us as people in a way because they just stopped giving a shit about what straight people thought. And they were so I think we're in a situation where flirting is fun. And if flirting leads to lovemaking, if flirting leads to a nice date on a Valentine's Day night, great. And if it doesn't, I'm happy for the people who get to engage. Thanks.
Thank you, Doc.
Well, I have to go. I have to reference the 3-second look. That was so perfect. And as a lesbian growing up, that was certainly the way. You know, you caught a woman's eye, and if you held it, you both knew that there was something going on there. And I feel like for me, flirting has remained pretty much the same over the many, many years since high school. It's the catching of the eye. However you catch the person's eye and you hold it just a second longer than necessary. It's the use of the voice. There's certain ways that I talk to people that I'm flirting with, and I think my register goes down. The sound just kind of gets a little more mellifluous. I get my radio voice on. And the other thing is touch, and it's always touch in a non-sexual way. So it'll be touch on somebody's shoulder or arm while you're talking. And it really draws attention to the fact that they have to pay attention to you. And over the many years, those are the same exact ways I have flirted with women all of my life. Being in a relationship now with one woman for 29 years, I use the same techniques. And you have to really pay attention to use them when you've been together for so long and there's only the two of you, because things can get so kind of routine. You know, you do this and this and this every day. Your libido drops a little bit when the estrogen kind of drops. So maybe watching TV might be the first thing on your mind at 9 o'clock at night, not having wild sex. However, if you use your whatever your technique is, it doesn't have to be mine, it brings the attention to, this could be a moment where we connect, and that it is a sexual and emotional connection. And it doesn't have to be something totally overt and wild. To me, it's always been a kind of a subtle, I like subtle things. That's the old Boston Victorian in me.
I love that. I love that there's also a lot of, in the younger generations, there's this kind of sharing also going on. And you just brought me back to a TikTok that I saw where this woman is basically explaining how to flirt for lesbians or for women who love women. And one of the big tips was, don't use your like heady voice, use a kind of lower, slower, softer register. And look at how that transforms the interaction. So I'm glad to be getting, seeing some of the same advice passing on generation to generation. So I'm looking at the time. I want to be respectful of all of our times here. So in the chat, we are sharing people's contact info. If you're watching this as a recording later, it'll probably be in the show notes, YouTube video notes section, or anything like that. I want to say thank you so much, Doc, Jewelle, Gigi, for your wisdom and for your stories and your dialogue. Thank you to Mason and Jack and the Outwords folks for all that you did to convene us here together. Thank you to me for moderating.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for the audience who is present now and the audience that I'm sure will be present later. I know I have a lot of folks who weren't able to make it, but we're really excited for the recording. So unless, there's anything, Jack, that needs to happen, I would love to just close this out, offer this space, in perpetuity as a little archive of these conversations, and send you all so much love. We're going to slowly close out here to make sure that the recording and the chat can get saved. But for now, good night wherever you are, good day wherever you are. And we hope that today gave you a little bit of juicy food for thought. Thank you so much. And we hope you have a good rest
It was
of your
so
day.
great to meet you all. Thank you. Hope we get to talk more.
Thank you for having us.
Yay.